The Myers-Briggs is used all over the place. Employers use it. It's used in terms of getting a sense of like what somebody's going to want to do in their career, right? Like career counselors use it empirically, though, right? So it's a very interesting test to be honest. And people like being able to say like, oh, I'm an ENFJ and all these kinds of things, right? It's really not a very good predictor of what is going to make somebody happy or what somebody's going to be good at or what they're going to end up doing in their lives. And so it would probably be the same either way, but.
All right. Well, we like to interview people and like learn about what they're doing.
Sure.
And just to share it with our students. Every time we start to talk to somebody awesome, I just want to make sure that we can share it with our families here, because they love this stuff. That's a huge part of Weequel School, are these parents from around the world that are like, I want my kid to have an opportunity to learn from experts in the field. So really excited to have Dr. Bergman here. Please just, tell us more about what you do and your area of study.
Sure. I mean, and one thing just to lead off with, I think we were talking during the demo day on psychology about, and you're kind of talking about the Weequel model and thinking about essentially like where learning becomes more productive when it's fun and you find things that you're interested in doing. And for me, I think the same thing is true of careers. And not everybody has the opportunity to do something they love. Some of us are more privileged than others to be able to do that. I'm one of them. And so I think I want to just preface before I get into what I do, that if you detect enthusiasm in my voice, it's true. That's real. That's authentic. I love what I do. And
very well rehearsed, man. It's
I'm just so grateful to be able to do it. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I have my PhD in clinical psychology. And the other, just from a kind of, I guess, educational perspective, from like the perspective of professional psychology, there are a few different kinds of psychology degrees. So the PhD is the most long-standing. The PhD in clinical psychology has been around in other kinds of forms of psychology. But in terms of clinical psychologists, these are psychologists who are trained in lots of different areas, but with always one of them being how to help people through psychotherapy. So there's a PhD, and then there's the PsyD, PSY.D, right? And there are some others too. There's PhDs in counseling psychology as well. But as far as clinical psychology, the difference, by and large, is that PhDs, we get a lot of training in research, and some training in clinical work too, right? How to do psychotherapy. Whereas PsyDs, the majority of their training is in clinical work. Now, I went to a very interesting program in Florida called Southeastern University, which is a professional psychology program, large classes where there were both PhDs and PsyDs. So I say all this to preface my introduction to say I got a lot of training in both research and I got a lot of training in clinical work, how to help people through psychotherapy. As I've gone along in my career, I've become more and more focused on the research side of things. So I'm a assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, associate director, Recovery Research Institute. Those are my titles. That's what I do when I'm trying. That's how I introduce myself. I'm trying to impress people.
impressive.
The description there in terms of what I do day to day is that I do research on essentially finding innovative ways to help people with substance use disorder. With a special focus on young people. I'm talking more like youth and young adults. So I have a special focus on the age range, or sort of the developmental life stage of emerging adulthood, which is this period of time between adolescence. And just because somebody turns 18 doesn't mean that they're sort of an established adult, right? So there's this life stage that happens where people are still dependent on parents oftentimes or other caregivers, still trying to figure out what they want to do in terms of their career, their social life. And so there's this period of like lots of excitement and opportunity and exploration. And it can be very stressful because there's uncertainty and people aren't necessarily settled to their lives. And it's also the time when if mental illness, including substance disorder, is going to emerge in somebody's life, emerging adulthood, this time period between 18 to 25 or 18 to 29, that's the most likely time it's going to show itself. And so this is kind of my area, and in that respect, my research focuses even more so specifically on digital resources, specifically for substance use disorder. So I'm very interested, for example, in online communities. We were talking during demo day in some ways about, we were talking in some ways about how somebody's social environment and their community and sort of their friend group, how that can make a big difference in terms of how they feel, protecting against mental illness for people that do have mental illness, for helping them initiate and sustain recovery over time. So this is one of the things that's most interesting to me and that I focus on a lot in my career. And then one more thing, and then I'll stop. So that's the bulk of my time is spent on the research side of things, doing my own research, collaborating with colleagues. We have this initiative institute I work at to take all. This is not my initiative. I just contribute to it, where we take all of the research on substance use disorder and we translate it into formats that we hope are more engaging for the general public, for clinicians. So I do that, and then the last thing I do that's part of my professional life is that I see patients in private practice. So I did train clinically at Mass General Hospital, and I have this area of expertise in helping youth and young adults with substance use problems and their families. So I really focus a lot on helping parents and other caregivers. I don't do any clinical work at Mass General now, but I did train there clinically, and now I have a private practice. It's my own business. I have my own professional LLC, limited liability corporation, that I do all this work under. Just a few hours a week because I do spend most of my time doing research, but it's one of the things that I really love doing. It helps me just keep everything attuned with everything else, so that my research is attuned to what people who are sort of need in their day-to-day lives. It helps me take what I do in my research and what I know about the science and use that to help people and sort of put it all together. And there's just something a little bit different in terms of the meaning we were talking about, of like helping somebody right there in the moment, one-on-one, versus research, which I love. We also have to talk about the process. I've come to love the process, but seeing the fruits of that labor can sometimes take years, right? So helping somebody right there in the moment is just a very different experience. And I love the opportunity to be able to do all those things.
I love that. I mean, I feel a lot of parallels with that, where like when we first started Weequal School, it was really just kind of like a first ditch effort at what do we do, because all the schools closed down. And so it was like, well, why don't we use this as a way to try to do multiple things that all kind of add in different ways. So there's a way that you're like balancing out, I should probably have some patients that I'm working with and be doing research, right? Because it's like you're learning from real people and connecting that with, I know my wife and I have done a lot of like publishing papers together, and sometimes it can feel very lofty, ivory tower and disconnected from reality. But when we're sharing our article about like machine learning technologies and the impacts, but then Sume's writing an article about machine learning and its impact on kids and the way that they should be interpreting things like Google results and friend recommendations through Instagram. Like all of a sudden it becomes part of professional work and growing and pushing yourself, building relationships with kids, and also homeschooling, but then also building out their professional networks through ours, and like all that cross-pollination. I love that. So that was a very long-winded response to just one tiny piece of what you said, but I feel that you clearly love what you do. You're very entrepreneurial. I'd love to hear more about like your private practice and what that's been like trying to grow a company on top of also just being a leading mind in your field.
Right.
Sure. Now, it's funny that you say that I sound entrepreneurial. I don't think of myself in that way, just to be perfectly frank, which is not to say that I'm not. It's just not how we all have professional identities in terms of how we think of ourselves as professionals. And if you said to me, Brandon, list off, like 100 things that describe how you see yourself and your professional identity, entrepreneur would not be in that top 100. So it's interesting that how we see ourselves is not always exactly how others see us, right? That's just sort of the nature
Well,
of being a human being, I guess. But
yeah, sure.
yeah, I think the reason I don't see it that way is because entrepreneurship wasn't what was driving the decision to create a private practice. It was like, yeah, it was. I guess in thinking about it was really the work, and I wanted to. I wanted to be able to do therapy, right? And I also wanted to be able to protect my research time, right? So, like, to have a private practice was the best way for me to. And this I made. So this happened. I was a postdoctoral fellow where I was doing half clinical, half research. So I was seeing patients 20 out. I mean, if we think about a work week as 40 hours, my work week is not 40 hours. I mean, that's kind of just the nature of when we get the opportunity to do something we love. It's not about 9 to 5. It's just I just have goals and work to meet them, and all these kinds of things. But it went from 20 and 20, if we think about it as a 40-hour work week, to 30 research, 10 clinical, all at Mass General. And then I was realizing in order to really become the researcher I wanted to be, I needed to really carve out a full-time research role. And I had support to do that. And so I was like, I really want to continue to see patients. So I was like, well, that's how I'm going to do it, is via private practice. And then I basically just do it, a couple evenings a week. And so it was more about like necessity being the mother of invention, where I really wanted to continue to be doing, to continue to be doing therapy and kind of exercising or working that part of my professional brain and helping people, again, because it's something different. And just the best way to do it is to have a private practice, create a professional, and to create my own business in that regard. Now, I don't really have much in the way of advice about how to grow a business for me, because something I'm trying to think about how to say this without coming across as like self-aggrandizing or something.
What's self-aggrandizing?
Where I'm bragging about myself, basically.
That's okay. We'll brag for you. I mean, it's
no, because I'm always working on humility. I guess the truth is when I've gotten the opportunities to be affiliated and work at institutions that have really far-reaching reputations, right, as being awesome institutions.
Yeah.
Right, and so because there's what we call institutional transference, which means people know that I work at Mass General and Harvard Medical School. Again, in this context, I'm not even here on behalf of them, but whatever. So people know that. And so they have certain affiliations, certain associations in their brain, and they go, well, Dr. Bergman works there. He must be really good as a therapist too, right? Which I happen to think is true, that I am good at what I do on the therapy side of things too. But for separate reasons than my institutional affiliations, right? And so I just haven't had to do much in the way of like marketing or business building, because I worked hard to get to where I'm at and be working at these institutions. And so, and also so that's one thing. Here's the second thing. Talking about I have like very vast professional networks that I got from being at Mass General and from the work that I do at the community level. And so I'm just getting referrals all the time. I also don't have that much time, so my time is limited. But I think in some ways, because of my institutional affiliations and because of this existing network, professional network that I had, I just haven't had to do much hard work sort of growing the business. In many ways, I'm trying to work hard to limit that, because I want to make sure that I'm carving out all, my time on the research side of things. I don't want to have the therapy take up so much time, because I really do love it and it could do that. But I really, at this point in my life, I'm working on the research side of things. So
yeah, no, I love that. I think that's another thing that that actually relates to some of the stuff that we're doing with our kids' startups too. Is don't spend time thinking about how you're just going to market. So actually, you want to talk like about Paul Graham, like you wrote an article about how people are constantly looking for tricks, and he's like, just build a great product.
Oh,
And like
yeah.
that whole thought, that was really good. But
Yeah.
she,
I mean,
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
also, well, it was, so Paul Graham runs the Y Combinator, which is the most successful startup incubator in the world. And so he was talking about, because a bunch of people, they would come in and they would be like, so what's the trick to getting investors? And it's like, well, they're and then he's like, well, there is no trick, just give them something that they would want to invest in. And then they were just like, well, how do we do that? And then it's like, what's the trick for that? And it's like, well, you need to have a good product, and that users want. And then it's like, well then what, how do I make it so that users want it? And it's just make it something so that adds value in their lives. There is really no trick that you can use.
They're so used to trying to
that.
get the A on the test and reading whatever the teacher's thinking about and trying to guess what the questions are going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, psychology, although, and there's a whole, we didn't really touch on this because I'm just not an expert in it, so I don't want to, I couldn't really speak with much authority on it. But that's psychology in many ways too. And there's a whole branch of psychology, oftentimes referred to as IO psychology or industrial organizational psychology, right? Where, however we refer to it, what you're talking about in terms of creating a product, right, that will have value in people's lives. The foundation of that is understanding people, right? And the degree to which we can understand what motivates people to make the choices that they make, or what somebody or groups of people struggling with, and if they had this thing, it would help them and make their lives better. I mean, that at its core is about psychology, and it's one of these examples of where, like, in thinking about how, technological innovations, for example. If you ever listen to, like, I mean, I'm certainly not a tech expert, although I do follow it. I have this interest, especially in health technology, especially in how health technology can be used to help folks with substance disorder. But if you ever listen to, like, these major thought leaders, and, like, the most immediate ones that come to mind, super famous ones, some of whom are still, some of whom are not, but, like, I've seen give talks for.
Are you cut out who?
Steve, you watch Steve Jobs give a talk, for example, or Bill Gates, people that everybody knows, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're like psychologists too, right? They, without necessarily having formal training, some people are just more intuitive with this stuff than others, but obviously at a high level, they have some, and even Mark Zuckerberg, right? They have a fundamental understanding of what makes people motivated to do certain things. What are people looking for? What are we missing? Right? So, like, Zuckerberg is just one example. I mean, there's so many offshoots now. He had this sense that we're social animals, right? I don't want to get into all the kind of moral, sort of moralistic discussion about Zuckerberg. We could do that, the ethics. That's a conversation for another day. But you know what I mean?
With us, but this is like, so Isla and Sume and Antigone, they just wrote an article about principles of learning, and it's just 10. Well, Isla, do you want to mention something about that? It was just like you guys went through all these leading minds. It was like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, like these people, and what are they saying about the nature of learning and the nature of work? And yeah, a lot, like the whole thing. Then they condensed it down into these 5 principles. Like, this is how to best accelerate young people's minds to prepare for this new digital global economy. But it's all psychology, because it's all about motivation and confidence and creativity and knowing yourself so deeply that you can leverage that which makes you uniquely powerful to adding value to other people's lives.
And sorry to interrupt, but not just about knowing oneself, but about taking the time to learn about others, right? Yeah. So that's, I mean, that to have what makes the thread through all of them is a curiosity about the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's right.
Sume, tell them what all the kids do as soon as they join Weekly School.
we'll have them take a personality test, so that and
Not just one.
but they take the Myers-Briggs and then the principal's you, and then they put it on their Slack profile. So you're seeing everybody, and it's just like Sally ENFP or something, and then you just know that, and that's really cool. And then we ask them what they're interested in, and then we ask them why they're interested in it, and then how can they share their interest with others, and then they create a project off of that.
I just did this earlier today. We did a private demo with and a couple boys joined. The mom found Sume's YouTube video, this interview with the Google developer, and so I just keep getting probably about 30 or 40 still. At one point, it was over 100 messages through Facebook from people asking to try to learn more about this stuff. But her boys hopped on. They saw the presentation from Mia, but then we just started talking to them. I asked them, like, what are they interested in? The first thing they brought up is like, well, my brother seems to be very interested in hitting me in the head. And so I said,
what are you interested in?
Yeah. But like, so the idea was like, well, tell them what happened with they saw your serious playlist and it turned into a project. Oh yeah. Isla, go ahead, tell them, because this is like your big thing. You like make these comedy videos.
Well, so I think he was talking about how his brother like annoys him a lot. And then so my dad was just like, well, why don't you did you see like the serious plays videos? And they said they did. So he was like, well, why don't you guys make a serious plays video about how to annoy your brother? And so it's like the serious playlist is like funny videos. It's entertainment videos that we make. And so they were just like coming up with all these ideas about ways that their brother like annoys them and stuff. So I guess that was really fun to be able to.
The twist into psychology was this, because the mom was trying to understand, how do we get these kids to like, she sees Isla and Sume collaborating, and more we're working with siblings to try to turn that relationship from like this adversarial, social hierarchy, positioning for power, constant struggle. Same thing with the parents. How do you turn this and use understanding of psychology to get them to start collaborating, creating together, learning from each other, and then creating things that are useful for other people? And so in about 10 minutes, it switched from my brother annoys me to, wait a minute, he's giving me project ideas for something that's funny. We can do this together. Right. I hopped on a Google Doc, shared Google Doc with him. Mom's watching. He's got his brother over there because now he's like, you're my business partner now. We can work together on this. And he's using the technology now, and he's writing in real time on this Google Doc, collaborating with his bro. And then, thinking through, like, how can we make something that would be interesting to help other siblings think about, being able to laugh at the struggles that you have with your brother, to turn it from like a pain point to something that can actually, sometimes laughter and comedy is like one of the ways that you can best overcome these challenges.
Oh, but yeah, totally. Yeah, that and shared experience. I mean, that's always such a powerful thing in terms of helping bring. And there's so many different examples of bringing people together, like shared goals and shared experiences, and the degree to which we can help facilitate that. Oftentimes, that creates more of a sense of collaboration. One thing I wanted to just bring up really, really quickly, because I could tell you guys have like this sort of thread of technology and how technology can be used to facilitate growth and all these sorts of things. One of the things that pretty much all technological innovators also have in common, or for the most part, is the belief that data makes a difference. Collecting data, analyzing data, and using data to make decisions about next steps. So, and I think that's the other thing that I in terms of the one thread in terms of my professional identity is yes, of course, in terms of research, right? We collect data and we analyze data, I'm often, a lot of the questions that we ask are about people and how people with substance disorder can change and how we can help them change. And so it's how to use data there. On the side of therapy, as best I can, I'm using treatments that have been tested scientifically, right? Sometimes we'll call them evidence-based treatment or empirically supported treatment. So it's this idea that like this treatment has been developed and tested out in the real world, and there's data to show that this thing helps people. So I will tend to use that. The other thing I do, and there's a whole element of sort of a school of thought in the world of psychotherapy. It's called measurement-based practice, where it's this idea that if we're helping people with psychotherapy, we should also be collecting data from them as best we can, using validated measures to get a sense of how they're doing over time. And it also helps create conversation. Data helps create conversation too, right? By showing people, hey, this is where you were at a few weeks ago. Here's where you're at now. And maybe there's been a little bit of dip in their happiness. We were talking about happiness. If you have a measure of happiness, for example. So why? What's going on? It creates conversation. So, and I think one sort of point of not education so much as just something to be thoughtful about. This is important to me, and to kind of want to impart this to you. You mentioned the Myers-Briggs. This is an example. So the Myers-Briggs is like this really interesting personality inventory. To get into all the kind of psychometrics of it is way beyond our conversation, and I'm not an expert on the Myers-Briggs. But one of the things I do know, for example, is that the Myers-Briggs is used all over the place. Employers use it. It's used in terms of getting a sense of like what somebody's going to want to do in their career, right? Like career counselors use it. Empirically, though, right? So it's a very interesting test, to be honest. And people say like, oh, I'm an ENFJ and all these kinds of things, right? It's really not a very good predictor of what is going to make somebody happy, or what somebody's going to be good at, or what they're going to end up doing in their lives. And so I always like to make the distinction between psychological tests or things that are interesting, right? And get our thinking going and sort of get our creative juices flowing, versus something that's got empirical support to be able to make predictions about what we're going to do or what we're not going to do. So, and the Myers-Briggs is a good example of that, where yes, it's interesting. And so I don't want to, I would never sort of invalidate your experience of using it.
Because our student Antigone did that during our personality demo day. So it's not a very good predictor of really anything. So we had two students, Seth and Layla gave their presentation on like the compatibility metrics from Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they got done talking about how useful it was in terms of helping them to better understand their differences and appreciating their differences, you got to tell them what Antigone did.
Oh yeah, Antigone was just like, it has no scientific basis. It was like all these things. It's just like, this is and at the end it was like,
the flow of it was hilarious, because Sumi's like, and next Antigone is going to provide a critical review of the Myers-Briggs.
Right, and they just got done talking about how useful it was, and Antigone just critiqued that thing into the ground with data.
It was really great. It was funny because I think we would have probably arranged it differently. We were trying to do so many things that I didn't even read it until before it was right about to go on. Sume was had reviewed the article.
I don't think I had reviewed it, because yeah.
But it was great. No, that's true. I think that also spawned a discussion about like, how do you assess the validity of ideas and test mental models?
Also, how do you use personality tests? Because we're not really trying to use it to be like, oh, well, you're an ENFP, which means you must be interested in this.
And then we force them to put it on their profile and memorize every strength and weakness that they have.
It's more a way in which you can start thinking about yourself, because when you're just thinking about who am I, you don't really know where to start, and kind of just going through the questions, you're starting to prompt thoughts about yourself. And what the end result really is, it might tell you a little bit about yourself. It might tell you a lot of things that you think are correct, but it's also just thinking about that, thinking about those questions, because usually people, that's not really something that people are really.
That's the big thing.
Yeah.
I love that. What you've just done right there is you've asked a research question, which is something like, as an intervention, does taking the Myers-Briggs increase self-awareness or lead to greater conversations about one's self-awareness? And I think that's an interesting empirical question. Just because it doesn't predict what career somebody's going to be interested in down the road, or how how somebody is going to behave down the road, perhaps it does start important conversations or sort of create a pathway to help, especially younger people, start to just become more aware of who they are, what they want, what makes them happy. And so it's one of the things in terms of my conversations with people in the real world when they ask questions. One of the things I probably say the most is, that's a really interesting empirical question, right? Because so many things that we talk about, like that question, it's like, maybe that's true, right? Maybe it's not. That's an empirical question, something that we could potentially test, right? But the first step to an interesting experiment is always making sure that you've got a really interesting and useful research question, which is what you just did right there.
It helps too that Sume is leading this team of app developers along with our CTO way to build and automate all of this into an app. So like one of our collaborators is an entrepreneur who built a social network for homeschoolers that helps connect graphically. And I stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning talking to him about a model, an equation for trying to measure the growth rate of learning. And it's a really challenging question in part because you have to define a lot of terms, but we came up with, I think, what is a fairly elegant model. It's very parsimonious. This app that Sume, this is like kind of her vision, that we're hiring developers anywhere. If anybody's watching this too later, if they want to be a part of this, we are hiring to grow that team globally. So you don't have to be a US citizen. By building this and automating this into the app, this entire process, we can test these things empirically. So things like, well, when did the student take the Myers-Briggs or have a personality type as part of like a set number of functions that students can do? And then looking at the rate at which they're able to produce projects that get positive results that we can measure through upvotes over time. So we can talk about this. Also, we can measure collaboration between siblings. So we can cross this out in the data and say, look, is better understanding of yourself actually helping you gain? And the theory behind this is you start to recognize the challenges that you have with other people are driven in large part by like genetic makeup and just that we have strengths and weaknesses. So you start to see this not as malice, right? You're applying like Hanlon's razor to understanding other people. And so all of a sudden you're able to do more collaborative projects with siblings. And those tend to be some of the most valuable projects that we put out there because they are such incredible teams when they're not fighting with each other. So these are things we test. And I'm excited.
Yeah.
The psychology.
What did you say? Hanlon's razor? I don't know what that is. What is that?
It's a mental model. I think it's from Charlie Munger. And it's about not attributing. It's about, I think, attributing malice.
Speak up a little bit.
Malice with stupidity instead of just assuming just because someone did something that hurt your feelings that they were trying to do it, and it was more just something. It was either an accident, they didn't know what they were doing.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. In cognitive psychology, we call that the hostility bias. That if right.
It is charitable interpretation. Yeah. But
I know. I like that. I mean, that's one of the benefits of technology, right? Helping people in whatever way, whether it's education, mental health, or what have you, is there's the ability to collect data built into those technologies oftentimes, and so it's just a lot. It's a lot easier than like 50, 70 years ago having people pay pencil measures, over and over and over again over a period of time. Now that data collection happens. In fact, I mean, the extent to which patients give permission. It's in a part of a research study, and I know that you all know this, but for anybody listening, right? Like there's every institute, if you're going to do a research project, you have to get it approved by the Institutional Review Board and IRB, because that protects human subjects from being harmed, either advertently or inadvertently, as part of research. They're fundamental institutions to protect people. So this is with permission from participants and approved by the IRB. But technology can also do all sorts of things too, with monitoring of what people are doing. For example,
cut out. Sorry.
Monitoring. So meaning, like, one way of getting a sense of what people are doing is by asking them, right? That's sort of active, right? Is you have the technology and people are learning, and then they're sort of contributing in as much as, like, in a sort of scary kind of way, and thinking about the bioethics of all this as well. But we're constantly leaving streams of data and footprints of data everywhere we go. Now, can that data, right, be used to get a better sense of and make predictions about what we're going to do, and then use that to sell us stuff? Sure, it happens all the time, of course, right? And it can also be used, and it is being used more on the research side of things, less so in the real world just yet, to understand, for example, with somebody, this is happening way more in the field of depression right now, right? So there's research, some of it's happening at Mass General Hospital right now, colleagues of mine, where they're using different kinds of technology, smartphone technology, wearables that measure biophysiological processes, other kinds of things that collect, where people are speaking, and it can use, collect data about tone of voice, can make predictions, right, about whether or not someone's at risk for relapse. Maybe they're in remission for major depressive, but they could detect risk for relapse. For example, something very, very basic, for example, but picking up on a decrease in how many calls somebody's making, or text messages they're getting or sending, right? So the person doesn't need to answer questions about how they're doing, but it's a way in which the use of technology, and especially as kind of passive observation, can be used for good, right? To help get a sense of how to help people in their recoveries from mental health and other kinds of substance use and other kinds of mental health problems. But I think what you're talking about is how to use it for education, right? And the ways in which all this data can be used to collect information about what are the inflection points in the learning process. How can we help facilitate collaboration? Looking at measures of, like, in clinical psychology, we call it family cohesion, right? And how does family cohesion change over time with these sort of educational models?
Put it in 1, 2, 3.
Right. So, and in many ways, I'm definitely biased in the way. I guess I should say this. People oftentimes will think about technology and the sort of the dystopian versus utopian aspects of technology, and for me, it's about all of it. It's about understanding the ways in which technology can be used to improve our lives. And it's also the ways in which understanding how technology can be used in ways to cause harm, advertently or inadvertently. We were alluding, for example, and I'll stop talking. As you could tell, I get very enthusiastic about this stuff.
Long form, Dr. Bergman. So,
what's that?
Like long form, Dr. Bergman.
Good. So during the demo day, the demo thing, I can't remember who it was, but somebody alluded to social media, and social media is a really good example. And I think about it in terms of substance use. So I mentioned online communities, right? So I'm very interested in how social technologies can be used as a tool, right, to help connect people, and in particular, connect people with shared experience around substance use, so they could be able to provide support, flexible support to each other, right?
The cheaper prices. They can, figure out who's got the best dealer.
Well, I'm talking more about the recovery piece, not the.
Sorry. Oh, okay, all right.
Not the substance use piece, right?
All of it, though, right?
Right,
yeah.
And I think that's the point that you're getting at is social technology is what it is. It's a tool, and it's people on the other ends of it. And so one of the things we also, those of us that do work in this area, we're also studying is, are there ways in which social media, in particular around how social media can expose young people to posts, whether it's their friends' posts or celebrities or advertising that shows or promotes substance use, right? and how those posts and being exposed to those posts that show or promote substance use can change and influence how young people think about substance use, right? Change their norms, social norms theory, making it more likely, and we see increases. So, and we see this empirically. We see first-year college students, for example, those who are exposed through their social media networks, right? And they have choice in this matter, right? Those who are exposed more to content that shows or promotes alcohol use, they show increases in their drinking 6 months later, right? Controlling for all sorts of other factors, right? So we think there's a causal relationship between this. So this is a way in which the technology, which connects people and can be used for all sorts of health benefits and health behavior change, can also be problematic. Even more so, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, is you were talking about machine learning, right? So social media companies, this is not like some conspiratorial dystopian thing.
Tons of documentaries about
this. Is just, yeah, this is true. This is just fact. Is part of what social media companies want us to do is spend more time on their platforms because they want to sell us because they want to expose us to advertising, because that's how they make their money. That's how they become trillion-dollar companies for the most part, right? And so part of what they do is they have, I have friends who say, like, how do they do this? And like, I'm not a computer scientist, but I know they have thousands upon thousands of genius computer scientists that help them, that use computer science, right? And machine learning, right? It's a form of artificial intelligence to make predictions about what will we want to look at based on our prior behavior. And they're really good at it, right? And so this becomes problematic in terms of the research that I'm talking about, where if we're starting to study TikTok as an example, right? Because that's what young people are using in a lot of ways. I have a colleague who's looking at TikTok and alcohol use and TikTok and recovery. TikTok is really good at knowing the kinds of TikToks that we're gonna want to see because we like that content. Where that becomes problematic is if they make predictions that that people want to see content that shows or promotes drinking, for example, right? So it's not just a matter of choice and this idea of free will and people choosing to follow, right, accounts that show or promote drinking. Because somebody might say, well, they're choosing to do that, right? And so it's up to us to provide education about, how to monitor and navigate social media. That's true. I think social media literacy is a part of this. And a part of this is the ways in which these machine learning algorithms, by nature of their goal of getting us to spend more time on the site, might be exposing us to content that shows or promotes unhealthy behavior, which can change our norms, and therefore make it more likely that we'll engage in these unhealthy behaviors. Another area this happens all the time is eating disorder behavior. Very well researched area. We know this empirically, that this happens in terms of exposing young people to content that shows or promotes eating disorder pathology or sort of disordered eating, which can reinforce. I don't want to say it causes eating disorder. That doesn't do that, but it can reinforce disordered or problematic, eating disorder behavior. So this is where the role, us thinking about technology in holistic ways, both in terms of how it can help, but also in ways that you could potentially harm, right? And what we need to do about that. So I try to think about it from that sort of holistic perspective.
No, I completely agree. There's so many things that I want to talk to you about forever, but I'll try to pick the highest and best. So one of the other areas that this comes up is through equal capital, and thinking about it, and something called representation bias. And it's this idea that, because our minds, there's only so much that we can think about, right? We have so much mental power to think through problems and interpret data. And so we use these heuristics to try to simplify the world, right? And one of those is like this representation bias, where we need to take terms like technology and social media and machine learning, and then we put these in these boxes, and then we assign certain feelings and traits to them, like good and bad. And so it forces us, if we're not aware of it and work really, really hard at it, to, fail to even be aware of life's complexity, right? If we actually could, for a second, consciously have an awareness of the true complexity of life and every single thing that's behind these terms, including the complexity of how we all interpret these terms differently,
Right.
not just across each other, but across time ourselves.
Right.
It's humbling to the imagination.
Yeah, and be, the part of the reason that we put things into boxes like this, right, is because it's uncomfortable to have what seem like disparate ideas about the same construct or phenomenon. It's cognitive dissonance, right? It's uncomfortable, right? It's one of the reasons that change is so hard as human beings. I mean, cognitive dissonance is a theory, right? But it helps explain a lot, and it creates problems because it
challenges one of the assumptions that we like to make as human beings, that we actually know what we're doing and we understand what's going on, and that we're informed, rational, reasonable people making responsible decisions based on sound data and thoughtful, intelligent, reflection. And guess what? That's really, really hard to do. It's a lot easier to simply change the way that we think so that we can feel better about our decisions, right? We can just simply take that quick shortcut. All of a sudden, the actual amount of energy that one needed to spend to truly understand an investment or how to educate their kids or how to approach a particular research project, now you've mentally made it so that you can feel way better about spending an hour thinking about it instead of weeks or months.
Yeah, one thing I just want to bring back to the Week School is that how to help young kids develop a digital intelligence. It's not kind of social media, the video games, the whole internet, right? All the good things and all the bad things. And it's just so important to develop the intelligence to use this for good.
And how are you thinking about how to do that? This idea of digital intelligence. What
we're most definitely not coming from ground zero here. The reason why my wife's asking this is because we keep needing, it's because of what I just mentioned about understanding. Maybe now you don't understand the complexity, but you're aware of the fact that you don't know. And that's why we keep diving deeper into those kinds of questions of what is the nature of childhood curiosity? Where does it come from? Why does it seem to relate so much to confidence, for example? We keep asking that question. We keep asking this question. How can we better use and understand what is technology, how it relates to childhood education, and how the fact that it's revolutionizing so much of the economy force us to really shift the way that we go about integrating technology in the right ways to prepare kids for this future. And the short answer is that it kind of seems like technology is essentially like guns during the Wild West. Like, they're dangerous. But our approach is much more like Suzuki for violin. It's show kids, give them exposure to it so that they understand it like breathing. Help them to make mistakes in a safe environment. Help them to not fear failure. Help them to explore and collaborate with other people. Get lots of parents and use them as like a hive mind to socialize ideas. Like the way that these kids are leveraging technology to gain insights and expedite their learning process. They're not just expediting their learning process, they're also expediting their ability to build networks, professional networks built from other students and their families around deep interests. They're leveraging these platforms to go through a faster process of iterative improvement to create something more useful for the world, right? They're creating digital footprints that are, people use that box, right, to scare people. The digital footprints that they're creating are extremely powerful, positive things that can help them to connect with otherwise people that they never hear about, right? And so we're not starting from ground zero here, but there's just, especially from you, it's like there are things that we can learn because you're closer to that frontier that can make all the difference for these kids. I could talk to you about this for days, but that's a question. We need to think about that more.
Yeah, and is that what you meant by? Sorry, I missed your wife's name. What's your name?
Lee Hong.
Lee Hong, hi. Yeah, is that what you meant by digital? Is that what you meant by digital intelligence?
Intelligence.
Yeah.
What's that?
Digital intelligence.
Yeah.
Using the increasingly vast array of digital, I would just say digital technology to improve one's life. I don't even distinguish school from life. That's a whole separate discussion, but you're improving yourself and your career. And how do you use these technologies and turn the tables around on things like, Facebook? Like Sume uses a lot of these. She doesn't use any of them the way that they were designed to be used. She uses them to leverage her own, mind to connect with other powerful people that share her interests so that she can grow faster and help people. But we can do that better. We can always be doing that better. But it's just hard to find folks that are willing to go the distance with us and to figure out, where is that new frontier? How do we dive deeper? How do we leverage data to test hypotheses quicker?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm with you on all those big questions. Yeah. I feel like I could talk about this. I could talk about this for a lot longer, but yeah.
We can wrap this up. I really appreciate your time. This was incredible. I think that the big thing is that when you find that your interests and your professional interests in any way align with any of the things that we're talking about, use us. Because we've got a team of, dozens of parents just on this private Slack group. And a lot of them they're very accomplished people, but they're all extremely curious. So that's one thing. And so
you got it. Yeah. And I'll keep a lookout for all the cool things that you all are up to. I'm sure you have a social media presence. I got to imagine. So I'll follow you on all the various social media channels. To see what you're up to.
Well, we want to follow what you're doing too, especially relates to these topics that our kids are writing about. They want to know,
Yeah, I do have a Twitter feed. I haven't been posting on it too much lately, but I do have a Twitter feed, and I use it to talk about research, and it's at Brandon B PhD on Twitter. So it's at BRANDON B PhD.
I got it. Yeah.
I have a whole 1,200 followers, so you could add to that. I'm joking about my follower count, but I really do that's not that many. But I'll tell you what for me, Twitter is about connecting with people and connecting with colleagues and other professionals, and I love speaking about social media and this idea of using it for certain things. I think that's what I use Twitter for. So yeah, definitely feel free to follow me on Twitter and stay in touch that way. That'd be great.
That sounds great. Don't feel bad because Sume just started her Twitter account 3 months ago because a lot of this is just blowing up now. This was basically just her hobby school during the pandemic, and then she did this interview that kind of sent a lot of people our way asking a lot of questions. So she went from 20 to 200 in a month.
Yeah, I got to imagine she has a much greater likelihood of exponential growth than I do. So.
Okay, great. You can ride those coattails.
That sounds good. All right, it's great talking to y'all.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.